Answers I can't guarantee.
And then we do like to get those on the mic, so I will run around with the mic, okay?
Here, I better turn this thing
on. All right,
on.
enjoy.
Can you all hear me?
No.
No? How about that? Okay. Well, good afternoon. It's nice to be back. Lovely looking group. So today, Jerry asked me to talk about caregiving. And I've given this talk before, but down here to a different group. And, but caregiving really, in the whole scheme of dementia, I know you're doing a dementia series, it's one disease that is guaranteed that there will be a caregiver involved. Because as an individual with dementia develops brain failure, somebody else's brain is going to have to take over. And that's going to be in the body of somebody else. So the issue of caregiving is actually becoming a huge public health issue. It's being talked about. It's not really being addressed as much as it should. But it's going to be groups like this that really sort of start to address the issue. So how many people in here are caregivers?
I was.
Okay. All right, good. So, well, I mean, that speaks to some of what I'm going to be talking to, because a lot of the caregiving is being done by people who are up there in years and who may have issues of their own. So what we're going to talk about is the impact of caregiving on the individual, but also a little bit more broadly on society and on our ability to deal with this. I'm going to give you some statistics, how it affects the family as well. And we're going to talk about the pathophysiology of stress. We're going to get into a little bit of science here, because it's important to understand when people are stressed or when you read about the effects of caregiving. And a lot of it, unfortunately, is kind of negative, and you may get that impression early on in this talk, but we're going to talk about what can we do about the stressful issues of caregiving. But I did want to go over what is stress. Everybody talks about it, but what is it? It's kind of like the weather, you know. Everybody talks about it, but nobody does anything about it. So hopefully you'll have an understanding of what stress does and why does stress have the impact on us that it has, our health and well-being in particular. And then we're going to review the literature of what have been effective strategies for dealing with the stressful aspects and other aspects of caregiving. Any questions? Is there anything that people wanted to make sure that we touched regarding your experience with caregiving? Anything that people have not had an answer to? Okay, so we'll work through this and see where we go. So we're going to start with a case presentation. So this is a 79-year-old gentleman. He's a retired professional living with his wife, who's 78. He suffered a stroke, and he has a dense hemiparesis. That means one side of his body isn't working. And his wife has some medical issues of her own. Our patient has required increasing assistance with his ADLs, activities of daily living, like feeding and clothing and toileting and that sort of thing. And he's becoming more confused. The wife is becoming stressed and anxious, and both she and her husband have missed some doctor's appointments. Their 40-year-old daughter leaves her full-time job, unrelated to health care, so she has no background in health care, to move home and help her parents. So what sort of issues does this bring up immediately?
Well, sometimes it's a financial issue, because I pretty can relate to that. I left a career and that has impacted. Personally, I left a career that I had intended to work another 5 or 10 years, And it has impacted in what I'm now earning, because right after that, they had a huge increase for the last 3 years.
Yeah.
And what I get is a pittance.
Yeah.
And I don't get Social Security, but I did it because it was necessary.
Right.
And I could take care of her until we had a major problem one night where I had to call the police because I couldn't get her out of the bathtub anymore. And she just didn't understand. And then she had a stroke, and then
Yeah.
we had to put her, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's a major issue, and I'm going to talk about that, is the issues of finance. But here we also now have a second person that's going to be involved, a 40-year-old who should be entering the prime earning years of her life and the prime years of her life, whether she has a family or she has needs for personal growth, whatever her issues are. And she now is also becoming a caregiver for probably 2 people. So to put this whole thing in perspective, there's about 50 million caregivers in the United States, and I'm talking today about unpaid caregivers. I'm not talking about people that work for a company. But 35 million of these caregivers take care of somebody who's older than 50, and because we're talking about dementia, about 16 million of these caregivers take care of an individual with dementia. And all of these numbers go with it, a family and other people involved, but that's the caregivers, okay? The total value of unpaid caregiving, as far as the financial value of unpaid caregiving, is $500 billion. Now, these are calculated in different ways, and actually, if you look at the way they calculate it, this number is low. It's 4 times what Medicare paid for home care. It's approaching the size of the Medicaid budget in 21 and the Medicare budget in 22. And in fact, if you look at the reality of the situation, it probably is about equal. So if we're looking to the federal government to start picking up this cost, it's just not going to happen. And so it really falls on groups like this and local community to address a lot of the problems that we're going to be talking about today. So who are the caregivers?
It went back.
It went back. This whole thing is moving here. This whole thing is moving. We have sort of a slow move at the bottom of this thing. I don't know. It's doing its own thing. So let me know if it moved when I didn't intend it to.
Artificial intelligence.
It is, exactly, which isn't that intelligent. But in any event, so 60% are women. The average age is about 50. Care provided is about 20 hours a week, but if you live with the care recipient, it's more than that, obviously. Most likely, the caregiver is taking care of a spouse or is the daughter of the care recipient. And 75% of recipients are 65 and older, and 40% of caregivers live with the recipient, which means that they're spending a lot more than 20 hours a week.
Just a little bit that way? Because
Sure.
I can see. That's right.
Here, let's see what we can do here. Am I in the way here? Yeah, I'm too, this isn't going to work. Okay. I'll tell you what. Let me stand back here. I'm going to look that way. You don't need to see me anyway. So we'll figure this out one way or another. Here, we'll just do this. 25% are caring for more than one person, and 60% are still trying to hold at least a part-time job. A third have a significant disability themselves that actually probably would require, in the near future, a caregiver for themselves. So you can see that this is a huge problem because it's the aging and sick helping the aging and sick, for the most part. Almost none of them have any formal training in caregiving, and it's all learn as you go. Looking at the uncalculated costs, the individual caregiver, as was just mentioned, loses the ability to save for themselves, prepare for their own retirement. They probably have increased health costs due to self-neglect. And in a sense, we're creating the next wave of people that aren't going to have the resources for proper caregiving when they need it. Okay? The cost to society is that as caregivers leave the workforce, those positions have to be refilled, retrained, and etc. And then when the individual wants to return to the workforce, if they can, they will probably have to be retrained, especially now technology is changing so fast. They will be older and they'll have more difficulty returning to the workforce. So all of this really falls outside of that $500 billion that we talked about with the cost of caregiving. And the reason why I'm giving these numbers is to put in perspective what we as a community, as a society, are going to have to grapple with, because the federal government and the state governments, to a large extent, simply can't. It's not a political issue, and the cost is also tremendous. We will talk a little bit about the ability for caregivers to get paid, but that takes some work. And all of this led Cindy Hounsell, who is the president of the Institute for Secure Retirement for Women, to state that leaving the workforce to care for a family member doubles the chance that a woman will end up in poverty. And this is really something that has to be recognized, because this is a problem now. But if you have a growing group of women who are primarily the caregivers, who can't then care for their own retirement and old age and etc., okay, now you've just created a much bigger pool of people, and it'll fall on women, and you sort of have this vicious cycle. We had a Supreme Court justice that retired to go home and take care of her husband who had dementia, Sandra Day O'Connell. If the family wants to hire caregivers, the average cost is about $50,000 a year.
Is it 24/7?
Yeah, I mean, that would be, the average cost, however many hours that's going to take. And this is in contrast to if you are institutionalized, it's going to cost anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 a month. So, we're talking about, up to $120,000 a year. Well, I'm going to try to get it less depressing. Did I skip something?
You almost
almost. Okay, thank you. This is the depressing part, but then I'm going to change it, okay?
We'll back up on the side.
On the side, okay. Okay.
We're going to make you a shadow man.
So what is the burden on caregivers? It really comes down to the fact that they have to take over for another human being, so they're dealing with all of the issues that all of us are used to dealing with pretty much without thinking. And so this takes time. They have to then plan for somebody else's finances, their transportation, their decision-making, and etc. So time becomes a huge issue for an individual caregiver, and it's time that they can't devote to themselves. Their life may feel like it's on hold. They can't really go forward with personal development in their own lives, whether they had intended on having a family, or if they're already married, what is the impact on the family? And the result is that they're fatigued. They often neglect their personal care, which results in increased costs because diseases are neglected. Diabetes can be neglected, hypertension, and then you get the complications from those. 25% report that their health has worsened. There may be family conflicts. In fact, it's been my experience that if there was problems in the family before, they got worse. Having a family member become ill and require care generally does not bring families together, I have found. And it just adds to the stress in the family because everybody else in the family also has issues that they're dealing with. And the result is that the caregiver may develop problems with their marriage. They certainly will develop loneliness if they don't get support from the family, increased stress, anxiety, worry, and et cetera, and they may start feeling guilty or resentful. And so unless we have some way to help the caregivers, this also then becomes a vicious cycle because they get sicker or more stressed, and the care recipient, especially with dementia, feeds off of that. And a lot of the behavioral issues that come up, I don't know if that's been a talk, but the behavioral issues that come up with dementia are a reflection of what's going on around the person with dementia because they don't understand what's going on around them. And the studies also show that caregiving, not always, but it certainly can actually shorten the life of the caregiver. And so this is the depressing part. I'm going to talk about why that is, and then we're going to shift gears a little bit. So, and then this is just a basic rundown of from Blue Cross Blue Shield, which has an annual report on the health of America. And back in 2020, they looked at the health of the 6.5 million members of Blue Cross Blue Shield that are caregivers. They have all the statistics, and they looked at the metrics that they keep for their enrollees. And on all of these measures, the cohort of caregivers was lower than their targets and lower than the enrollees as a group. Hypertension, diabetes, inflammatory illness, cancer, depression, anxiety, obesity, hospitalizations, and emergency room visits, because things were neglected generally. We talked about how it can shorten life, and again, the studies show that the caregivers that have the highest level of stress, if you test them through questionnaires and that sort of thing, the caregivers who have the highest levels of stress can have up to a 2 times mortality rate compared to low-stress caregivers. And the low-stress caregivers are the caregivers that have more resources, more help involved, and et cetera. Okay, so why are we looking at all of these bad outcomes, and why? What is the impact on? Yes.
You went back. Could you go back 1 slide?
Sure.
You said that younger caregivers have a higher mortality rate. Why is that? Because they start out earlier, or what?
Probably, and then also because if you start out with self-neglect and you're resetting your life backwards. Okay.
Could you repeat that? When you turn your head to the right, the mic doesn't pick it up as well.
Okay.
There you go.
The mortality rate is higher in younger caregivers because basically it resets their life backwards. And all of the things we talked about, your life being on hold and et cetera, they're at a younger age, and so their mortality rate, in a sense, they're aging more quickly. Could you hear me better that way? I'll try to.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, you're not me wired up here. I got more.
Wait till we shock you.
Okay, so back in 2009, Elizabeth Blackburn got a Nobel Prize for her work with telomeres. And telomeres are proteins at the end of chromosomes that protect the chromosome from one replication to the next. When a chromosome replicates, if it isn't an accurate replication each time, then you develop mutations and they can be bad. And she found that it's these telomeres, which are proteins at the end of chromosomes, that protect the chromosome between replications. And she used pond scum as the organisms that she worked with. And you might ask, well, why are we talking about pond scum in a talk like this, okay? Well, it's because her lab actually, it turns out, was almost all women. Elizabeth Blackburn is a woman scientist who has devoted her life to getting more women in science and promoting female scientists. And her lab was almost entirely women. And what they found was that when the organism was stressed, the rate that these telomeres shortened, because the telomere shortens with each replication, the rate of shortening increased, and the length of time that the cell lived shortened. So there's a relationship between the length of the telomere and the length of life of a particular cell. It's called programmed apoptosis, and it happens with every cell in our body. You know, we don't have immortal cells except for some cancer cells, but healthy cells have a natural lifespan. And when the telomere gets short enough, the cell dies, but it's been replaced by a new cell by that time. And they found that when these organisms were stressed, the telomeres shortened more quickly and the cells died more rapidly. And so one of the researchers in her lab said, well, let's see if that holds true with humans. And they picked women caregivers to look at. The women in the lab recognized that caregivers were under stress. In this particular study, it was women who were taking care of children with autism. And they found that, in fact, compared to non-stressed non-caregivers, the telomeres did shorten more quickly and the cells turned over more quickly. They died more quickly. And so the question then was raised, well, why is this? Well, what it comes down to is something that's in the news all the time and everybody talks about it, your doctor talks about it, and it's stress. But what is stress? Stress basically is an inflammatory state, okay? When we are stressed, whether it's physically or emotionally, the brain puts into motion a whole series of events that results in an inflammatory state. And in this case, stress both from psychological or physical stressors, you get the stress response, and part of the brain, the hypothalamus and the pituitary talk with the adrenal glands, and they start pumping out more epinephrine and norepinephrine and cortisol, all of these inflammatory proteins that also raise our blood pressure and raise our heart rate, and etc. The body then modifies in response to all of these things, and in fact, it can affect the way our genes behave, because the genes put out proteins to counteract or to enhance the response to stress. And the net effect is that we adapt to a new situation, and if it's a chronic situation, it's more of a maladaptation than an adaptation. The stress system in our body is really designed to be an acute system. In other words, if you're in danger, all of these things come into play to protect ourselves. But if we're chronically stressed, we develop a chronic inflammatory condition. And it's the inflammation that affects the telomeres, but it's also the inflammation that affects our health, whether it's heart disease, whether it's our underlying inflammatory disease that we may have, whether it's arthritis or, in fact, diabetes, in a sense, is an inflammatory disease. All of the diseases get worse with chronic inflammation. And just to draw the point about what a whole body experience is, you know, I talked last time about that there is no mind-body disconnect. In fact, our brain is hardwired to the rest of the body through the nervous system and through the hormonal system. And so when the brain is stressed, and that's where we experience stress, that's where we're aware of stress, It affects through the vagus nerve. It affects the entire GI tract. The vagus nerve is the longest nerve in the body. It goes from the brain stem actually, all the way through the GI tract and hits every organ on the way down. The heart, the lungs, the liver, the kidneys, the spleen, the entire GI tract. And it has a lot of effects on all of these different organs. And then through our hormonal system with cortisol and epinephrine and norepinephrine that I just mentioned, those also have effects, and they make the fat cells start to produce inflammatory cells. Our fat cells is where a lot of inflammation comes from. Fat tissue is not just sitting there, it's a live tissue, and in fact, it is responsible for a lot of the inflammation that we have in our bodies. And it produces some of these chemicals called cytokines and chemokines that are inflammatory proteins that are constantly circulating in the body. And so when you have somebody who is living in a stressful state, their body really never gets a chance to re-equilibrate. The person may not even be aware of this, but over time, their risk of heart disease goes up, the risk for all the things that we talked about goes up because they are in a chronically stressful situation. And medications really don't do much for this. I mean, that we don't really have a lot of good stress blockers. Maybe marijuana or something like that. But.
The anti-inflammatories?
No, not really. I mean, this is at such a global level. And I mean, if you look at the different proteins that are involved down here, the cytokines and chemokines, and I mean, anti-inflammatory drugs work pretty well at the joint level, or you know, some areas of the body that have a relatively low level of inflammation, and it's an acute kind of thing. There's no medications that can quiet this whole system down. In fact, there are medications that can quiet this whole system down, like steroids and some chemotherapeutic drugs, but then now you're dealing with that whole system as well, because those are the strongest anti-inflammatory drugs that we have, but they come with a long set of bad side effects. You can't put people on these for years without something bad happening. Okay, so that's why caregivers who are under stress have these high rates of health problems and emotional problems. It's because of this chronic stress level. But caregiving isn't all gloom and doom, okay? As everybody knows who has been a caregiver, you think back and, you know, there was times that I wouldn't have missed for the world kind of thing, okay? So a caregiver really can develop a sense of accomplishment. They're learning new skills. They have to learn to be resourceful because the system is not built for people who have disabilities. It just simply is not. You know, somebody who's in a wheelchair, you know, if there isn't a ramp, 4 inches can really wreck your day. You can't get that wheelchair up over a 4-inch lip. And people who just walk around all day, they have no clue about how a 4-inch step, like a sidewalk or something, can really ruin somebody's day. Being present at the time when the care recipient could be very lonely. I mean, illness is tough. Even with dementia, early on, demented people understand that their brain is failing. They're aware of this. In fact, they may be aware of it well beyond any point that we can communicate with them. You know, who knows what level of awareness they have. Caregiving can give lasting changes in the life. It will change perception. It will change our perception of our society, our place in society, how society responds to people who have disabilities, responds to us, the people that have helped us, the people that haven't helped us. It will change our perspective, and I think overall it's a good change. I mean, more people need to be made aware of the problems with disability. I've always said that I think that medical students should be required to sit in a wheelchair for a week.
Exactly. That's true.
You can't move without a wheelchair for a week. And the other thing is to be a patient for a day or two. We are making a difference as caregivers. Clearly we're making a difference in somebody's life, because without that caregiver, that person would not thrive in any way. Okay? They might be institutionalized, and that's the way that thing goes. And then we develop memories of the loved one when they do pass. And it's something that the caregiver can carry that they wouldn't have experienced without being a caregiver. So let's look at the literature of what works to lessen the stress of caregiving, because that's really what this comes down to. We have to provide services and help to the caregivers to decrease stress. And so a lot of different studies have looked at different things, and the long and short of it is that if one of the ways, if we can integrate meaning of caregiving, like I just talked about, it's been shown that changing our mindset actually has a positive effect on how quickly those telomeres shorten. Again, there is no mind-body disconnect. What goes on up here affects everything else, both positively and negatively. And so if we can help caregivers change their perspective, if they're struggling with emotional issues, for example, and this isn't all caregivers, obviously, but if they are, then there are interventions that work, adaptive interventions, things as simply as taking time for meditation or to exercise. Now, granted, if you don't have somebody to watch the caregiver, the care receiver, it may be difficult, but there's ways to get time for ourselves, even when they're sleeping, for example, and etc. But there's ways to help an individual change their outlook on their situation. Am I working this out a little bit better?
Yes.
All right.
Good.
There's also work looking at, okay, so if we use multi-component interventions, what works and what doesn't work. And what's been looked at is psychoeducation, teaching about what are the psychological changes, both of, like, say, dementia in this case, or stress, or, what's going on. Just if people learn things, it also takes away some of the fear. There's an understanding of what is going on. Teach them skills and knowledge. I mentioned earlier that most caregivers, it's learn as you go, because nobody was there to train them. Especially like with something with dementia, if you develop feeding problems, and let's say that they put in a feeding tube, or the person develops bed sores, or they're incontinent, all of the skin care, people aren't born knowing any of this stuff. And if there's not a way to train the caregiver to know how to do these things, then it just increases the stress. Professional and peer support they obviously need. Case management, if an individual is hospitalized, there will be a case manager involved. But if you're not hospitalized, case management is important, because what a case manager does is look at all of the different components that have to be addressed. And it's tough for one individual to do that. So I don't know, like if in a church like this, if there's a way to get case management, or if there's social workers that are members of the church that can give little talks on, how do we address these sorts of things? Because the inputs are going to come from the community. They're not coming from the federal government. Exercise for the caregiver. Exercise just in and of itself decreases stress. It decreases the stress hormones, the stress proteins. It helps the brain. And I'm not talking about running a marathon. Exercise comes in many, many forms. And I have a whole nother talk on what is exercise. But the long and short of it is that if you can take some time to move at a little faster pace than you're used to, that's pretty good. Okay, walk a little bit faster, or you know, put on some music and dance. If you're alone, dance alone, or there's somebody else to dance with, or, you know, you don't have to buy a lot of equipment. There's lots of ways to move, and that's the main thing, is to keep moving. And then teaching things like meditation and mindfulness, which is basically they just work to give the person a time to sort of look inward and allow themselves to grow as an individual, to learn how to sort of block out the stressful situations. Again, this takes time, but there's ways to do it. I did want to just mention one thing here. Now, these multi-component interventions that have these various components, either all or some, they showed that it has a very positive effect on caregiver burden that we had talked about, their feeling of well-being, their knowledge, obviously, if we're going to teach them skills. But their effect on depression was quite variable. Some of the studies showed no effect on depression per se. But what did show an effect on depression were programs that included respite and daycare, which meant that the caregiver had time for themselves. Okay, they were able to attend to their own needs. Those studies have shown that it did have a very positive effect on depression as well as the burden and well-being. So if we can come up with ways to help caregivers to get time, which was the first thing on the list, that goes a long way to helping that caregiver. Get them out of the house if they need to go shopping or keep a doctor's appointment or go for a walk. If there's ways to, even if you have somebody who can come in and sit with somebody with dementia, those are going to be the kind of things. I'm sorry. I'm being told that you have your hand in the air.
Yeah, it's okay. People who are, is there any studies that would show people who have a lot of, let's say they're very optimistic in their outlook on life, and they have a lot of, they're doing caregiving, are they having less issues with you know, being and having them inflammatory diseases?
Yes, in fact, there was a study. It's interesting because the study that showed the 2 times mortality, that was within the group of the 25% that rated their stress as high. And when they tested their stress on questionnaires, it was rated as moderate to high. That was 25%. Among the 75% who did not rate it high, their health statistics were no different than the control group. So yes, this has a huge effect. And so, but there's other things involved too. I mean, some people have more resources than others. You know, if you already don't have a vehicle, say, and it's already difficult to get a ride to go somewhere, and then you also now have somebody who it's difficult to get into a vehicle. I mean, all of these things, they may not be items that you would necessarily think about, but for that individual, it can become a huge problem. And it gets to the point they say, well, screw it, I'm not going to go to I can't get to the doctor's appointment. And it was because of lack of resources. So yes, a positive attitude, not just with this, but with everything. A positive attitude will decrease your stress.
Well, I got married 5 years ago, and about 3 years ago, he started losing his memory. And I am not, by nature, a caregiver. I want to run away. Running away from it is my first thought. But I don't believe him for better or worse, because I didn't plan on this, and this is really bad. He was a very brilliant man and a very adventuresome person, and now he doesn't do much of anything, and he doesn't want to go anywhere. And, you know, his family was very upset about us getting married, and now they think I'm a saint because I'm taking care of them. Well, I'm ready to give them back. I don't know if I can do this. I really don't. And I really wonder what kind of what kind of toll the stress is taking on me, you know, so I'm kind of worried about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's real. And
There's a daycare here, you know.
Well, he's not ready for that. He wouldn't go if I asked him to.
well, it's true that one of the problems with dementia is that as the dementia worsens, their world becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. The places that they feel comfortable become smaller and smaller until it may just be the couch. You try to get them outside and it's a big old thing, you know. They can have issues. So if there's still a family involved, rather than giving him back, maybe the family can get more involved and give you some time.
They're in Indiana.
Well, it's a problem. Yeah. And this actually is sort of the issue, because you probably don't need necessarily a whole lot of time, but you need some. And that really is where things have to be addressed. Yes.
I was just going to say for that lady, that the family that lives in Indiana could make arrangements for one of them to come for a week and stay with your husband, so that you could go away with girlfriends, you could go to a spa, you could do whatever. Even that little bit, you know, once or twice a year, or maybe once a quarter, would make a huge difference in your life. And it's their responsibility, even more than it's yours. You married him, but he's been theirs forever.
Yeah, well, actually I took 2 weeks off. We have a trailer at a campground up in Show Low, and so he knows everybody. It's only about an acre and everybody's close together. And so I warned everybody around him to take care of him, and I gave him a key to get in if he didn't come out. And he was fine, you know. He just sat around and read all day, so he was fine. And then last week he went to Texas, to Dallas, Texas, to his sister's 80th birthday, and it's a no-stop trip. So we were worried that he wouldn't find his way around the Dallas airport, but he did.
Wow.
So he went on his own?
Yeah, he went on his own. And so, you know, I mean, those 2 weeks and 5 days I had were the best I've had for 3 years.
Okay. Well, and that makes the point, right? I mean, it was time.
Yeah.
That's what changed.
Yeah.
And it decreased your stress. I mean, your face was lighting up while you were telling the story.
Yes.
Right.
I'd like to share something with you. My mother-in-law had dementia, and she would not go to the daycare over here. And she and her son said, let's go together. So they went the first time together. It was very difficult to get her to go, but that might work if you went with him the first day, and then he might like the people that are there, which wound up, actually he had to go about 3 times, but
Yeah.
that might work. You know, he might want to enjoy the people that are there, because sometimes it's a fear. She was afraid to go because she didn't know anybody, but you know, she adjusted. It was a great respite for both of us, because we were both taking care of her.
Yeah.
Is he a veteran?
I was going to say something, I forget what it is.
There's a question over here.
Thank you.
Many of the churches have,
Wait for the mic.
oh, I've got a very loud voice. Many of the churches have Stephen ministers, and
He is a Stephen minister.
but he needs one of his own now. And, my friend who got her husband involved with it, she said he was a lifesaver, because it was somebody that her husband did continue to communicate with long after he quit communicating with others. And he became a respite person, and
That's good.
so
That's a good
check
idea.
out the churches. They're a godsend.
They help you.
Great.
And one of the major problems is that I'm a social butterfly, and he's kind of a recluse by nature. So, you know.
She's a social butterfly.
Yeah, I'm a social butterfly, and he just is doing stay home and do nothing.
Bring the butterflies in.
Well, you know, what's also happening here is something that's been shown to be very, very effective, which is support groups, but they don't have to be a group that meets in one particular place, you know, and has coffee. I mean, there's many different ways to have support groups, whether it's by telephone or online, there's support groups. But, you know, it really sounds like people have experienced what you're going through, and they can help you. How did they cope with it? How did they deal with loneliness or, wanting to give him back, and that kind of thing. Listen, because it's not, there's nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, this is tough work. This is very tough work. So yeah, I would encourage people to talk. That's where the change is going to happen. I can tell you, the feds aren't doing it.
Well, when you say, that the caregivers don't get paid, well, being married for 5 years, we came into it saying, my money goes to my kids and your money goes to your kids. So I'll never get anything from doing all this work for all these years,
Well, which is something that you also need to address while he still has his mind, because, one of the things that people forget when they are working and earning money is that, yes, we look forward to our retirement and we want money for our retirement, but retirement ends at some point, okay? And that money is not just to go on cruises, it's to take care of us at the end. And, people want to will their money to their kids and all that stuff. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but there may be needs now. And, I don't know your situation at all, but it is something that's worth talking about. We just went through this with another family member.
I don't think that, his willingness to do things for me is anywhere near what it was when we got together. He now, pretty much thinks about him and not about how it affects me, which I guess is reasonable. But anyway. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to bother all you.
No. Listen, that's the reality of the situation. Oh. That's the reality. That'll stress you out. The reality of the situation is everything that you've just now talked about. And that's why the statistics that I just showed you are real. And so, not knowing you or not really knowing the resources in the area, it sounds like there are people that do, and they can help maybe direct you to somebody. While he is still mentally capable of getting through the Dallas airport, now is the time to start addressing those things, because he still has capacity. Okay? If he loses capacity, unless you have a durable power of attorney or a power of attorney for financial affairs, whatever he said before is what's going to be honored. Right. So the whole issue of capacity comes up with dementia as well. And many people wait way too long.
No, his children have all those things. I don't have any of them. Time to send them to Indiana.
I just want to bring up another part of this, the intervention with the care receiver.
Yes.
Is also very, very valuable.
Yes.
They remember, oh yeah, here's my friend, came to see me. It's wonderful. Work on it.
Well, in fact, some studies have shown that when you involve the care receiver in a lot of these things, the care receiver does better. I mean, certainly your husband is capable of understanding certain things about inflammation. He may not want to hear it, but he's certainly capable. If he can get through the Dallas airport, he can understand the talk that I just gave.
Go read the medical book.
Great. And he could straighten me out. I might have missed something, which is great. But getting the care recipient, in fact, it's the next slide, training the care recipients was effective in increasing the caregiver's subjective well-being and reducing the care receiver's symptoms, okay? So getting the care receiver involved, and then also, just as we talked about the issue of personal growth, they're going through problems with their personal growth. I mean, they understand that they're losing it. And so if there is somebody that can talk with them about, well, what are you experiencing? And, what are you feeling? What are you thinking? The problem is that once somebody has a diagnosis of dementia, people think, well, their mind is shot. Well, that's simply not true. It just simply is not true. They are developing brain failure, but just like heart failure, it doesn't go from a healthy heart to dead, okay? And you can compensate for heart failure, just like you can compensate for brain failure. The brain is an organ, and dementia is brain failure, and it doesn't fail all at once. I saw another hand. Yes.
What I find helpful are interest groups. I go to several. I go to one at my church, I go to one at La Posada, I go to one at Friends Indeed, and these groups help me to understand what dementia is all about, what other people experience, not feeling lonely, because we are all in this together.
Yep.
We've all got different things, and it really does help. And I found self-help books with Alzheimer's and dementia. There's one out there called The Joy of Making Memories. It's excellent, and it tells you what's going on with your recipient and what you can expect and how you can handle things, how you can change yourself. And I've had to change myself completely to deal with this, and now it's easy because I kind of know what to do and when to do it and how to say it, how not to say things, and it's very, very helpful. I would encourage people to get in with some
absolutely. I mean,
groups.
And you'll find that you're not, as you said, you're all in it together. You may be at different stages, but that's good because you can learn from each other. And part of this whole issue of training is also to train caregivers about what to expect with dementia. Because, I mean, in this case it's dementia, but there's many different diseases. But there are issues that will come up with dementia that will have to be dealt with. The capacity is one of them. Somebody who has been diagnosed with dementia, they can still have capacity for a while, and that while may be quite long. Okay? Capacity means that they can make decisions for themselves. Okay? If they lose capacity and things aren't in place, then it really becomes a mess. But issues such as feeding and swallowing issues, they will occur with dementia if the individual lives long enough. Everybody with dementia, essentially everybody with dementia, will develop swallowing issues. And then you have to deal with, well, what are we going to do about it? And I really wasn't going to talk about that today. I'd be happy to talk, but the whole issue of artificial feeding. And if you don't know what the individual's thoughts are before he loses capacity and the ability to communicate, and if the caregiver, or let's say that you are now the guardian, doesn't know the facts about feeding tubes, for example, that they don't prolong life in somebody with dementia, they don't improve their quality of life, they don't decrease aspiration, regardless of what the gastroenterologist is trying to tell you, is just simply not true. And an individual may choose to say, look, if it gets to the point that I'm only going to be kept alive with the artificial feeding and it's not improving my quality of life and my ability to do interesting things, I don't want it. But that has to be marked, that has to be understood. In the United States, the default position for hospitals will always be that they will do, quote, everything, whatever the everything means, unless it is written that it's not to be done. People like to say, well, why do they do that? Well, because there was nothing that said not to. And CPR will be done, a feeding tube will be placed, they'll be put on a ventilator. I mean, all of these things need to be discussed, because if they're not, and if it's not clear in an advance directive, then it will be done.
Liability.
It's not even liability. It is not the place of the physician to make those sorts of value calls. I don't know your value system. But if you are a patient of mine and medically you need to be intubated, unless somebody says that no, she is not to be intubated, here it is, etc., it's going to happen.
And does the hospitals feel that liability, though? And that's why their policy.
Well, their liability is going to be if they don't do it.
That's right.
Yeah.
If they do it, they don't have liability unless they did it with an advance directive in place. Hospitals have been successfully sued for doing something against somebody's wishes that were clearly and legally in place.
Because that's happened, hasn't it?
Oh yeah, it's happened. Yeah. Yeah, but I can tell you that a lot of my job as a palliative physician was taking 80 and 90-year-olds off ventilators, and One of the questions I always ask the family, because it was now we're in a situation to have to make decisions. I said, if your father was alive and he was looking at this situation today, what would he tell you? And half the time they said, well, he'd kill us. He'd say, stop it. And so it sort of helped them to be able to say, yeah, that's what he would have wanted. But it could have been avoided with an advance directive.
Mine's 20 years.
Okay. It's worthwhile looking at it again.
After 20 years.
Yeah, well, technology has changed. And yeah, I can tell you. Anyway, it's worthwhile changing. All right, so we've talked about what we need to do as individuals, and the direction that things are going slowly on a wider basis, talking about hospitals, for example, is that slowly the medical system and the medical education system is recognizing that caregivers have to be part of the team. When somebody is hospitalized, it's not just the person that's hospitalized. The caregiver is going to be the one that takes care of that individual when they get back home. So if you don't involve the caregiver in decision making, then the whole thing's going to fall apart when they get home. So the medical system, including in the chart, needs to formally recognize the caregivers and include them in the plans. Now, the best way, again, for all of this is to have an advance directive that includes basically something. You have to state who you want to speak for you if you can't speak for yourself, okay? It's not a guardianship per se, that goes through the courts. But in an advance directive, you will state, if I'm unable to speak for myself, I want this person or these people to speak for me. And these are my wishes, and etc. So the fastest way to make sure that the hospital gets you involved is to have an advance directive and a durable medical power of attorney. Medical power of attorney. It needs to be a durable medical power of attorney, because a regular power of attorney ends when the person loses capacity. People get when what? It ends when the individual loses capacity. Oh. So you say, well, I'm the power of attorney. If that individual can't make decisions, they're comatose, unless it's a durable power of attorney, it ends when the person loses capacity.
So when they need it, it ends.
If you did the wrong thing.
Gotcha.
So I would caution against going online and doing all that stuff, because it's best to go to a lawyer that deals with elder issues. That's what we've done, and there's a growing number of lawyers that deal with elder issues, and you get it done right, and then it's much less of a problem. Then you also have a piece of paper to show them in the hospital, I want to be involved. I will be involved. Along with that needs to be the assessment of the needs of the family. Yeah, I'll get to you just one second. Because if they don't understand what the situation is that this patient is going to go to on discharge, and they don't compensate for that as part of the discharge plan, you know, with steps in the house or whatever the issue is, or who's going to care for this individual, the whole plan can blow up, and that person's coming right back to the hospital, and they will get dinged on that by Medicare. I've got a question here first.
I just want to point out the fact that my husband and I travel, and we have an envelope that goes with us that includes our entire medical history, medicines and vaccinations and the whole 9 yards. It includes our advanced directives in there, so that when we go out of the country or wherever, it's there. It's a package deal. And it just says for emergency.
We do the same thing, yeah.
So it's amazing the number of people who have this, but they leave it at home, and they get in their car, and then they have a fatality, and they're injured, and nobody knows anything because you're unconscious. So it's in our glove compartment of our car.
Yeah.
So wherever we go, it goes with us. And so it's just something you might want to think
Well, the
about.
even more amazing thing is the number of people who haven't done this.
Well, that's true. I just gave a presentation on the 5 wishes, and it's like...
We prepare for
I
everything.
still asked them, how are you doing? And they said, it's on the kitchen table.
Yeah. We prepare for everything in life, you know, our baby's name, you know, where they're going to go to school, all their birthdays, their graduations, our marriages, our job, our vacations. We just go all through life, but when it comes to planning for what is the only sure thing in life is that no one gets out of it alive, well, I don't want to hear about that. Well, somebody's going to make a decision, and if you don't, you may not like it. So anyway, yes.
I'm a retired physician, and I also have an incurable disease that's tearing my nervous system apart. I have the end results now of the Agent Orange phenomena, which is medically probably better understood if you could get a dictionary called spinal cerebellar ataxia. And this has been this is an enlightening program, well done, well put together. Talks about all of the stuff that you go through and need to look at, and looking for avenues to solve some of these problems. My wife and I have found it. See, fortunately, my wife is a master's in nursing and a director of a large rehabilitation institute in Kansas City. When we moved, and going through this together, found the environment, the neighborhood, specifically your friends and neighbors, churches, and organizations to help us get through this. I am now on hospice, and the group that came, three professionals, nurses, social worker, caregivers, have given us a lot of satisfaction just in a short period of time, knowing that we're not doing this by ourselves, we're doing it with the assistance of people who professionally are doing this, and found it well. I have, as a professional, and my wife assisted in hospice care directly, and it's given me a lot of satisfaction to see my wife really a relationship quickly develop between the caregivers and our situation. Like tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, there's a lady come who gives baths. And she's going to scrub this scrawny old body. and my wife had been doing it up till now. So I think she's really happy about it. This is just a kind of a personal aside from a good program, and experiencing some of these things maybe a little ahead of time, but I am ready, willing, and able to do this and support whatever is done for us, including our family, especially my wife, who has been my caregiver at home, and it's tough. Besides me and 3 dogs, she's had her hands full. But just keep that in mind. There's lots of things that might maybe turn you off a little bit, but you need to investigate some of these things, and what I just experienced, and I'm quite pleased with what's going on, what's happening, and I know my future. And here I am talking about it and performing as hopefully as best as I can right now.
You're doing great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for your service.
Well, you know, since you brought up hospice, I'm going to just say a few words about hospice because, again, this is for dementia. Hospice is a benefit that people have earned, okay? It's designed as a 6-month benefit, but the average length of stay on hospice in the United States is less than a week. People wait way too long. Now, with dementia, we have a lot of patients that are on for a much longer period of time because dementia is a little more difficult to gauge. But hospice absolutely is a set of services that people have earned. It's their right. It was started back in 1986, and it's a Medicare benefit, and it's designed to identify people who, in the opinion of the physician, have about 6 months or less to live if their disease takes its expected course. It doesn't mean that you get off hospice if you're still alive at 6 months. It just means you need to get recertified if you still meet the criteria. And there's certifications as you go along. But hospice is nothing to be afraid of. Hospice brings a whole set of, matter of fact, it basically brings all the things that we've talked about here. They help with the family, they help with personal care. You're going to get a bath tomorrow. You're going to smell like $1,000,000. And because I know these hospice workers and they love what they do. Okay? So don't shy away from hospice. We can talk sometime if you all want. I can come and talk about the whole issue of end-stage dementia. I mean, that's something that people really need to know about because decisions need to be made, but they need to be made early.
I hear that there's the new thing is hospice at home. Is that what?
Well, most hospice is at home.
Oh, most of it is at home?
The vast majority is at home.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, inpatient hospice is, you have to meet certain criteria and they're much stricter because it's much more expensive. But yeah, 85% of hospice is at home.
Oh.
It's a good way to stay in the home too.
Yeah.
May I just have a personal plug? As many of you know, I write for the paper on Neighbor, and I just posted on the myths about hospice. That's an article that I put in the paper, and many of what the doctor said is in that article. And the idea is that it's better if you go earlier as opposed to when you're really at death's door. And I've got a lot of other things. So I hope that you can read the article.
Is it in Wednesday's paper?
No, it's on Neighbor. You have to sign up for NABUR. It's a free service, and then you'll get the articles.
Well, there's another area that's growing in the United States. Hospice is part of what's called palliative medicine.
Yes.
But hospice is not palliative medicine in the sense that palliative medicine is not hospice. Hospice is just a small part of palliative medicine. The best time to start thinking about palliative medicine when you look back is about 3 years before the person died.
Right.
Okay? If you look at studies of, pick a disease, cancer, heart disease, dementia, if the people who got on these palliative programs early, they invariably live longer than people who did not receive palliative care. So hospice simply will not shorten your life. People think that, well, they give them drugs and blah, blah, blah. No, you give medications appropriate for what the situation is. The medications never killed anybody. Okay, the disease did. But hospice as a program, because it brings the interdisciplinary team into the home, it will prolong life, as will palliative medicine. Again, you know, we can talk about, you know, what's the difference and what does this mean? But particularly with diseases, as a matter of fact, on Friday, next Friday, I'm giving a talk to the Parkinson's group.
Oh, good.
And I will be talking about that.
Good. Where's that going to be?
It's Well, it's not that I forgot. I don't know the area. I have the address in my...
Oh, okay.
It's near Green Valley, it's right on La Canada.
Oh, okay.
They have a new location
Yeah.
there.
I mean, I put it in Google Maps, and that's where it is. You know. And then, again, I talked earlier about case managers and navigators and et cetera. And again, this can be through organizations. You know, my hope is that we start looking at, you know, churches, synagogues, community groups, to start putting together these services so that people can help each other out. You know, it's really an area that affects all of us older people. But the younger people need to get involved too, because the only cure for old age is to die young.
What are these ads that I keep seeing on TV? They typically show a young woman taking care of her grandmother. And they talk about paying a caregiver in your family and that they get paid at the end of their shift. Who's covering that?
Well, actually, it would be Medicaid. In Arizona, if the care receiver has Altex, Arizona Long-Term Care, through Arizona Medicaid, through Access, the family member can apply to become a caregiver for that individual and will get paid.
Oh, I see. Okay. Thank you.
There's also some programs that there actually are some long-term care programs, people who have paid for long-term care insurance, that the insurance will pay for family caregivers because they found it's cheaper than putting the individual in long-term care. So the smart insurance companies are actually paying families to do this. So you would have to look at the policy. It's difficult. The Medicare does not do it. And it's done through Medicaid, and it varies tremendously from state to state. But Arizona, actually, I've known a number of people who were paid caregivers through the Altex program. Now, that takes care of the pay part, but it doesn't take care of a lot of the other things. I don't know how much it pays, but...
I was just curious how that was happening.
It is possible, yes. Yeah. All right. Now, talking of doing it all together, there you go.
There we go. I have more of these cards.
I've gotten peripherally involved with this group. Lynn Sevier asked me to come give a couple talks to the group.
She's here too. She's here at the end over there.
Hey, Lynn, I thought you were in Kansas or someplace. Well, welcome back anyway. And, well, Lynn, I'll tell you what, you talk.
Thank you. There are the cards.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
I passed mine out.
Hi, Helen. Hi.
There you go.
Oh, hi. I came to say hello to you, Dr. Decker. I did not expect this. Green Valley Cares. One of the biggest issues here in Green Valley is loneliness and stress among caregivers. And so Green Valley Cares has been established as a way of addressing that. And all we do, and it's the most important, beautiful gift you can give to someone, is just to sit and listen. And that's what we do. We listen. Many of us are nurses, others are not, but nevertheless, they're caring individuals who want to alleviate these lonely feelings. And so, Green Valley Cares. There are cards here, you just call, and if you know somebody, and everybody here knows somebody in their neighborhood or among your friendships who fits that description. So the greatest gift you can give them is to encourage them to call Green Valley Cares.
And are these volunteers that
totally voluntary.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah, it's a wow.
And they've had preparation, you can tell us.
The posse is here.
I can hear that.
Many of the people who are part of this group are here amongst you today. And they're prompting me, thankfully. Yes, those who are not nurses have been trained in how to listen because it's an art form.
And I'd like to say thank you very much to your organization, and I wish you'd have been around in my shoes in New Mexico. Not in my shoes, but there to listen for 5.5 years.
We're here now. We're here now. Give us a call.
It's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we're very happy to do this.
And clarify, will you make a visit to a home?
We can do this either by phone or in a visit. It's up to the individual themselves where their comfort level is.
And there's no cost. Totally free.
Free. Free. Free. That's right. There is no cost. This is from the heart.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Welcome back.
I haven't planned yet.
Oh, okay.
Here. We can put the cards out here and you guys can grab one if you know someone who could use that service. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. So there's lots of resources. They're easy to find on the internet. Pima Council on Aging does actually train caregivers. I mean, these are paid caregivers. And I don't think that they train family caregivers.
We can't hear.
Part of listening is to be quiet. Doctors have to learn that. When you walk in the room, say hi, well, how can I help you, and then shut up. And so I'll end this thing with a sunrise on a stream in Idaho.
Wow, nice.
It's over here. Do you want it? Yeah.
Oh, it's stress relieving just.
Isn't that nice?
Dr. Dolan,
Yes.
any studies on the effects of the caregiver's stress and the increased use of alcohol and drugs? We are seeing a rise in these addictions and means of coping. So is there any studies to correlate that some of the caregivers are succumbing to this as opposed to finding alternatives and support groups?
I'm sure there are. I didn't look up that in particular, but I mean, there's nothing that would make a caregiver different than anybody else who has this level of stress. I mean, people turn to all kinds of ways to cope. And the fact of the matter is that since we're dealing with humans, everybody, because like I said, the only cure for old age is to die young. And many people are already dealing with alcohol and other issues before they then have an added situation where they're either a caregiver or a care receiver. And if you put that on top of the issues with alcoholism or other abuses, yes, it just makes this situation much more complicated. And so that's something that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Doctor.
All right. Well, good luck, and I'm glad that Lynn got involved with, I mean, these are the kind of programs that are going to make a difference. I hope that I can change the statistics of the talks that I give, but that will only happen when more communities, churches, groups get involved and help each other.